In 1881, when wealthy Pittsburgh industrialists bought an old dam to create a private mountain lake, they removed the dam's discharge pipes, its only way to lower water in an emergency, and sold them as scrap metal. 8 years later, 2,208 people drowned. You're listening to The Unlit Room. Every story in here actually happened. That's the part that should scare you. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. This episode's narration is AI-generated. The research, writing, and editorial decisions behind every story are made with care for accuracy and respect for those involved. Today, the lake above the valley, and what happened when the people who owned it prioritized convenience over safety. South Fork, Pennsylvania, 14 miles upstream from the industrial town of Johnstown. 1879, Henry Clay Frick, steel magnate, one of the richest men in America, stood on a hillside looking at an abandoned dam. It had been built decades earlier as part of a canal system, then left to deteriorate when the railroads made canals obsolete. The dam was 72 feet tall, 900 feet across. Behind it sat a dry basin, 400 acres wide. Frick saw a private retreat, a mountain lake, a fishing club for Pittsburgh's elite. He and his business partner Benjamin Ruff organized the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. Membership was exclusive. Dues were high. The list of members read like a directory of America's Gilded Age aristocracy. Andrew Carnegie's partners, railroad executives, bankers, industrialists. They bought the property in 1881, and then they started making changes. The South Fork Dam had been built by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania between 1838 and 1853. It was an earthen dam, compacted soil and rock, reinforced with a clay core. Not concrete, not steel, dirt. When the club purchased it, the dam had been abandoned for years. It had failed once before, in 1862, during a period of heavy rain. A partial breach had drained most of the reservoir. The state had repaired it, but the dam was never quite the same. The club hired engineers to restore it. But restoration wasn't the only goal. They wanted the dam to serve the club's needs, so they made modifications. First, they lowered the dam's crest by 3 feet. Why? To widen the top and create a carriage road so club members could drive across the dam to reach their cottages on the far side of the lake. Convenience. Second, they installed metal screens across the dam's spillway. Why? To keep the stocked fish, bass primarily, from escaping downstream. The screens were made of iron wire mesh. Debris could clog them, but the fish would stay in the lake. Third, and this is where it gets dangerous, they removed the dam's discharge pipes. These were cast iron pipes that ran through the base of the dam. They were the only way to intentionally lower the water level. If the lake rose too high, you could open the pipes and release water in a controlled way, preventing the dam from overtopping. The club removed them, sold them as scrap metal. There was no longer any way to lower the lake in an emergency. Lake Conemaugh filled slowly over the next few years. By 1881, it was full, a private mountain reservoir holding more than 14 million cubic meters of water. 450 feet above the town of Johnstown, the club built cottages along the shore, a clubhouse with 47 rooms, stables, boathouses. It became one of the most exclusive retreats in America. Members arrived by private rail car. They fished, they sailed, they hosted lavish dinners. 14 miles downstream, Johnstown went about its business. Population 30,000. Steel mills, rail yards. Working-class families. They could see the dam from certain hilltops. They'd heard rumors that it leaked, that it had been weakened. But the dam had been there for decades, and the people who owned it were millionaires. Surely they knew what they were doing. Micro cliffhanger 1. Except one of them didn't think so. One man knew the dam was dangerous and tried to stop what was coming. Daniel Johnson Morrell was a member of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. But unlike the other members, Morrell had joined for a specific reason. He wanted to monitor the dam. Morrell lived in Johnstown. He managed the Cambrai Iron Works, one of the largest employers in the valley. He knew what would happen if the dam failed. He'd done the math. 14 million cubic meters of water, 450 feet of elevation drop. a narrow valley funneling the flood directly into a town of 30,000 people. It would be catastrophic. Morel inspected the dam repeatedly. He saw the leaks, he saw the patches, he saw that the spillway screens were clogging with debris every time it rained, and he saw that there were no discharge pipes. He warned the club, repeatedly. In 1880, he wrote to club president Elias Unger, "This dam is not safe. It must be repaired properly, or it will fail." Unger thanked him for his concern. Morel offered to pay for the repairs himself, out of his own pocket, whatever it cost. The club declined. Morel continued to warn them. Year after year, the dam leaked. The patches held barely. The lake kept rising every spring with snowmelt and rain. In 1885, Daniel Johnson Morel died. 4 years later, the dam he'd tried to save failed, exactly as he'd predicted. Late May 1889, western Pennsylvania. A low-pressure system formed over Nebraska and Kansas and began drifting east. By May 30th, it stalled over the Allegheny Mountains. It rained, hard, 6 to 10 inches in 24 hours. Creeks overflowed, rivers swelled, streets in Johnstown were already flooded from local runoff, 10 feet of water in some areas. People moved furniture to upper floors and waited for the rain to stop. 14 miles upstream, Lake Connemara rose. Micro cliffhanger too, and this time there was no way to lower it. 31st, 1889. Dawn. Elias Unger, president of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, woke to find the lake within inches of cresting the top of the dam. Still raining, the spillway was completely clogged with debris, branches, mud. The iron fish screens had turned the spillway into a dam of its own. Workers tried to clear it, couldn't. The debris was packed too tight. They tried to dig an emergency channel on the western side of the dam to relieve pressure. The mud was too soft. It kept collapsing. They tried to raise the dam's crest by piling rocks and mud on top. Too late. The water was rising faster than they could work. At some point that morning, club engineer John Park realized they were going to lose the dam. He rode his horse down the valley to the nearest telegraph station and sent an urgent message to Johnstown. "The dam is in danger. Warn the town." The message was received, but it wasn't treated as urgent. Why? Because there had been warnings before, false alarms. Every spring, when the lake rose, someone would send a message. And every spring, the dam held. This time was different. Park sent a second message, more explicit. "The dam will fail. Evacuate." It was not delivered as urgent. At 1:30 p.m., the workers abandoned their efforts. They retreated to high ground on both sides of the dam. They watched. Between 2:50 and 2:55 p.m., the center section of the South Fork Dam collapsed. 14.55 million cubic meters of water, released in 45 minutes. The flow rate temporarily equaled the average discharge of the Mississippi River. A wall of water 60 feet high began racing down the narrow valley toward Johnstown at 40 miles per hour. The flood hit the town of South Fork first, swept away houses, killed dozens. It hit Mineral Point, East Connemara. The Pennsylvania Railroad yard at East Connemara was obliterated. Locomotives weighing 80 tons were picked up and tumbled like toys in the current. At approximately 4 p.m., the wall of water reached Johnstown. Some residents had already evacuated to higher ground. Most had not. They were dealing with the local flooding, 10 feet of water in the streets from the rainstorm. They didn't know what was coming. The flood destroyed the center of town in minutes. Wooden houses were lifted off their foundations. Brick buildings collapsed. People clung to debris, rooftops, tree trunks, pieces of wreckage. Some survived. Most didn't. At the edge of town stood the Stone Bridge, a massive Pennsylvania Railroad bridge made of stone arches. It was strong enough to withstand the flood. It didn't collapse. It became a dam. Debris piled up against the bridge, houses, trees, bodies, locomotives, a mass of wreckage 30 feet high stretching across the valley. And that night, it caught fire. Likely from overturned stoves, oil lamps, anything combustible in the wreckage. The debris pile burned. Survivors were trapped in the wreckage, pinned by beams, unable to escape. The water was still flowing around them. They burned alive. The fire burned for 3 days. 2,208 people died. Some sources say 2,209. The exact number was never confirmed. Too many bodies were never recovered. The South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club expressed sympathy. Some members donated money to relief efforts. Clara Barton and the American Red Cross arrived on June 5th to lead the recovery. It was one of the first major disaster relief operations in American history. But sympathy wasn't accountability. Survivors filed dozens of lawsuits against the club, against individual members, against Henry Clay Frick, Andrew Carnegie's partners, the railroad executives, the millionaires who had bought a dam, weakened it, ignored warnings, and caused the deaths of thousands. Not one lawsuit succeeded. The legal issue was this. In 1889 Pennsylvania law, you could only be held liable for damages if malicious intent could be proven. The club's lawyers argued, successfully, that there was no intent to harm. Negligence, perhaps, incompetence maybe, but not malice. The courts agreed. Not a single club member was found liable. Not a single dollar in damages was ever paid. The legal defeats of the Johnstown survivors became a turning point in American tort law. Over the following decades, legal scholars and reformers pointed to Johnstown as proof that the existing system was broken. If you could own a dam above a town, weaken it for your own convenience, ignore repeated warnings, and face zero legal consequences, then the law needed to change. And eventually it did. The principle of strict liability, the idea that some activities are so inherently dangerous that you can be held responsible even without malicious intent or negligence, grew in part from the failure of Johnstown survivors to find justice. They lost their homes, their families, their town, and they lost in court. But their loss changed the law for everyone who came after. The South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club disbanded quietly in 1904. Its property was sold at auction to pay off the mortgage on the clubhouse. Henry Clay Frick went on to become one of the most powerful industrialists in America. Andrew Carnegie's legacy became libraries and philanthropy. The other members returned to their lives. None of them ever visited Johnstown after the flood. None attended a funeral. In 1889, you could own a disaster waiting to happen. And when it happened, walk away. The people of Johnstown proved that wealth and power could insulate you from even the worst failures. The law eventually changed, but it didn't change in time for them. If this one kept you up tonight, good. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Subscribe so the next one finds you too. Follow the Unlit Room wherever you listen. Tell a friend who can't sleep. Full story on the main channel. Follow if you're wide awake. That was the Unlit Room. See you in the dark.